Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Pope Metallicus, and welcome back to Rock and Roll Religion, where we have a real special episode for you guys today. One of the founders of their genre and still going strong, 25 years into their career, a little over, almost 30 now, actually. Really, really strong band and known around the world, the Teutonic Titans themselves, Blind Guardian. And to help me do that, as always, we have the Sentinel. How's it going, my friend?
Hell, brother, what up?
Oh man, this is going to be an interesting one.
They actually formed in '84, so it's almost fucking 40 years.
Yeah, damn. So, as you guys can tell, Marines can't do math, so
No,
I know numbers good.
I just remember reading some of the Wikipedia background of the band like a couple of days ago. So
yeah,
I'm just surprised they've been around that long. Because I started
a lot of these bands were around for years before they actually recorded, and that's always been an interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
That's partially due to the genre. I mean, let's face it, metal is not the most popular style of music out there. So, the big record labels aren't going to find metal bands unless they're really exceptional. And that takes years worth of playing in clubs and, getting your name out there.
And also the fact that they formed in Germany, and Germany at that time was split between West Germany and East Germany. So
these guys are West German, I believe.
Yeah, they're West German, but I can't imagine, having a thriving music industry in West Germany at the time. If anybody lived through, that era, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think maybe that's why it wasn't until the 90s when Europe started really embracing like power metal and just classic heavy metal in general, because through that, from like 1990 through like 2003, pretty much, it was Europe that kind of embraced heavy metal the way we did in the 80s.
Absolutely, and it certainly kept the genre alive in new and interesting ways too. Like, while America was creating new metal and things like that, Europe was over here, doing things like this with, the first couple Blind Guardian records. I was noticing, re-listening to a lot of this stuff, there's a huge thrash influence here.
Yes.
Which makes perfect sense given when this album came out in 1988.
Right. And we were just talking about that. That's the height of thrash metal awareness.
I mean, the big four were at the height of their power at that point.
Yes.
Anthrax had really just started releasing some of their classic content.
They were just coming off of Spreading the Disease, which I think is a massively overlooked album in their discography.
Yeah, they were creating killer content. Megadeth was in the height of their powers with Peace Cells.
Mm-hmm.
I believe South of Heaven came out the same year.
South of Heaven came out in '88, I believe. Well, you're right. Yeah.
So, we're talking, the classic period of Slayer's career with in between Rain and Blood and South of Heaven.
Right.
And then you have Metallica coming out with Master of Puppets, and then shortly after this, And Justice for All.
Right.
So, thrash is at the height of its powers. You have a lot of speed metal influence here too with that double bass.
Yes, absolutely.
Coming in from, bands like Accept and all the speed metal classics of the 80s, maybe even a little Racer X in here. And it really shows on these first two records that are just straight up aggression. And the fantasy themes are still in there. I mean, let's face it. You have songs like "By the Gates of Moria" and "Gandalf's Rebirth." Gee, I wonder what franchise that could be about.
Yeah, exactly.
So, these are bands who've always worn their Tolkien influence on their sleeve, and we'll say that repeatedely throughout this, because there's
that's definitely a theme that Blind Guardian has throughout their entire career, is their love of Tolkien.
And, I mean, Hansi Kirsch is widely known as a fanatic for Tolkien lore and stuff like that. Like, he knows all of it, and it makes perfect sense for the power metal genre, because let's face it, you have the battles of good versus evil. You have these epic fantasy battles with all these different races. And also you have the more folky side of like, the lore and stuff like that of just a guy with a string instrument just sitting around a campfire telling the tale.
Right.
And, songs like the Bard Song. So, you'll really get all of the hallmarks of power metal coming through these guys in their career. And it's cool to see the progression because it follows the same. It is the creation of power metal. At the same time, like you'll start to see more of the symphonic influences later on. You'll start to see, a little bit more of the synth and fantasy elements and folk metal come in. But this is like the basics, like, bare bones power metal of the 80s, where it was more speed metal than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Now, did Halloween have a large influence on Blind Guardian? Because I didn't really find
They were
anything.
kind of coming up at the same time, so I'm not sure how aware these guys were of each other. Certainly you can see here that they do have, the song Halloween on their first record. So, but it doesn't have anything to do with Halloween's version of it. So I think that may have just be an artifact of them being German and Halloween being a very Germanic tradition. So I'm not sure how aware these bands were of each other at first. Certainly by the time Kai Hansen had left to form Gamma Ray, there was some definite cross-pollination going on there.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how aware these bands were of each other early on. Which is honestly, to me, a little more interesting if bands like had their own plans and then heard what others in their own space were doing and kind of not aped each other, but were kind of like influencing each other and creating this fabric that would become power metal.
Yes. Now there's like you. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You said speed metal, and I was just thinking to myself, yeah, there is a lot of. You mentioned Accept, and I was just thinking about some of the songs like Guardian of the Blind.
Yep.
That's straight up speed metal right there. Right. It's also very Accept influence, as you said.
Which makes sense because Accept was probably the biggest German band of this period
at the time. Well, other than Scorpions, yeah, absolutely.
Outside of the Scorpions,
Scorpions had really made themselves more of an American established act, and they were more, I guess, at the time you would call it pop metal, whereas Blind Guardian at this time was more speed metal, like Accept was.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Soul Assassin, you're absolutely right. The power metal folks are all D&D nerds, every single one of us.
Yes, power metal, we're fucking nerds.
Oh yeah, I mean, it is certainly the nerdy side of metal because we're not talking about like, cranking beers and doing drugs and all the fun stuff. We're talking about like, sword and sorcery and battles between good and evil and angels and demons and things like that.
And it's not just that content. I was just thinking of the way Dio would write lyrics. He would write lyrics in a mythological way where you could interpret. He would refer to different kind of established folk elements, like this idea of bringing yourself up, empowering yourself. You are the hero of your own journey, kind of thing. And
that's really kind of what heavy metal in general has always been about, and certainly power metal in specific is just that you are the hero of your own tale. So like go out and grab life by the balls and be the power in your own life, essentially.
Right.
And that's certainly something Dio was always talking about. Songs like Rainbow in the Dark and Holy Diver and shit like that.
And that's what caused Dio to struggle career-wise in the 90s, because suddenly his type of music, his songwriting was not in vogue anymore.
And that really aspirational, really positive message kind of fell by the wayside in the U.S. anyway. But it seemed like the Europeans were paying attention because
God bless the Europeans. They always get something right once every blue moon. You know what I mean? And preserving heavy metal for the United States, for that period of time where we lost our fucking minds with all of this like
Ye
country and hip hop and grunge and then new metal. They were
and yet
preserving
through
it
all of it,
for us.
rock and roll has been sitting there in the background, just kind of doing our own thing the whole time.
Exactly.
And every now and again, you'll have a band like Wolf Mother or something like that that breaks out in the mainstream and actually gains some serious popularity. And then, the rest of us are just kind of all over in the background, just doing our thing. But in Europe, and this is one thing I am extremely jealous of our European listeners on, you will hear songs like, from Blind Guardian or Sabaton or whatever, just on the radio, which is mind blowing to me because even
How
the
does
rock
that even?
stations around us
That
won't play
blows
the
my
music.
mind. That blows my fucking mind. That's even.
If you can find a
Imagine
local
driving
rock
in your
station that
car
won't,
to
if you can,
work,
if you
and
can
all of
find a
a
rock station
sudden,
that
oh,
plays
go ahead.
if you can find a rock station around here that plays anything that's actual metal that's after like 1994, good luck.
Here's a quick little tale. The last time I heard a radio station in the Bay Area play heavy fucking metal, like from Europe, was 2002, 1077 The Bone Metal Zone. After midnight, they would always play the Metal Zone, which was from 12 a.m. to 2 a.m. And that's how I discovered Primal Fear. Somebody played Black Sun from
Nice.
the title track from the Black Sun, and I was just like, I know this sounds like Priest, but it's still fucking awesome. Who are these guys?
Yeah.
That
Well,
was the last time, and that was 2002. So,
well, like we were talking about last time, Ralph Sheepers was actually in consideration for the gig singing in Priest after Rob Alford left.
and he wouldn't have been a bad choice either.
He would have been an excellent choice, I think. Especially coming off of Painkiller, you can hear that influence in Primal Fear stuff.
Oh my god! If you listen to Nuclear Fire, it's probably the biggest like Valentine's Day card or no love letter to Priest you could ever imagine. But the songs are so Primal Fear that there's not any, you don't come up with they're just ripping off Priest. You're always gonna get that one asshole who says that, but you know, you'd have to, guys. If you listen to Primal Fear out there, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's really hard to describe what it is, but when you hear Primal Fear, you will know immediately who their influences are. Just like
Yep.
with these guys, like if you spin this first record here, you will hear a lot of early Metallica, and you will hear a lot of Accept, and more than a little bit of Motorhead.
Yeah,
And
I
like
didn't notice
it's
that,
just this
but
interesting
it's there.
cacophony.
It's there.
Yeah, and it's like you will hear it in the background and just kind of like, yeah, that's what these guys were talking about. Like it's right there. Like it's hard to notice, but until somebody says it, but once you hear it, you'll never forget it. It's one of those things too. Like I've listened to these bands for years and never noticed some of this stuff, but now that I'm coming back to it for the show and re-listening to a lot of it, sometimes for the first time in years, you notice a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And especially listening to as much variety as I do now for the show and just for my own entertainment, you really hear a lot more than you used to when you heard this. Just pick this record up when you were in high school or whatever and spun it, because now you have all of that other information. And when you like, I'd never really listened to this album in its entirety. I'd heard bits and pieces of it, but then when I spin it, I'm like, this sounds a lot like early Metallica with a little bit of Slayer in there.
What I also noticed is it's really consistent from track to track to track to track. It's almost like they're
That's
Kill 'Em
something that
All.
Blind Guardian does throughout their entire career. I almost have trouble noticing when a song changes.
Yes, I was sitting at my computer and on my TV I've got a pretty good stereo system, so I
Yep.
just like click it on and just had it, the playlist go through it, and I'm just like, this really reminds me of Kill 'Em All. Whereas every song just kind of just you don't notice it just flows right into the next really perfectly, and it sounds just as heavy and just as sonic as the last one.
Yeah, and like, these first two records, I think, are the best with it. And yeah, Soul Assassin, a little bit. There's a, I wouldn't say they're influenced by Racer X because they were never really all that popular outside of like the California and Southwest American scene. But they do have a lot of similar sounds, probably because they were all influenced by the same guys. Um, with a little bit of Megadeth, which makes perfect sense given when they were formed. That these guys would be listening to that and then putting that into their music. And I think they continue on right into the next record. And let's face it, this is where the power metal album cover starts getting its real debut here. It starts with a lot of the early Dio stuff, but you can't tell me this isn't power metal as fuck.
Yeah. I mean, this is not just power metal. This is like, you've got the dwarf, you've got a Gandalf kind of figure, and then you got this like hooded,
You know what this reminds me
wraith-looking
of?
figure. It's Lord of the Rings without trademark infringement.
Yeah, I mean, you know what this reminds me of is like a lot of like the '90s action adventure game covers
Yeah.
and stuff like that, where they'd have this art style and like you have all the hallmarks with like that traditional cloaked wizard with the freaking stone archways and all that. It's just like straight out of
Yeah, that
the
was a
playbook.
good catch. The architecture of
Hmm.
the buildings and everything. Yeah.
In fact, Halloween had something similar like that on Keeper of the Seven Keys.
Yeah, that's right.
So, like, if these guys weren't influenced by each other, they were certainly all doing this or taking influence from the same things.
Yeah, I'm sure Blind Guardian won't necessarily admit this, but yeah, I really feel like there was some definite Halloween, ooh, I'll take this little element. Ooh, I'll take this little element, kind of thing going
Or
on.
that's really cool. I want to do my own take on that for our stuff.
Right. And that's totally appropriate. That's
No,
totally
I mean
appropriate.
that's like we were saying last week. I mean, everybody gets influenced by everybody. That's the one I had in mind, Soul Assassin, with the old Elder Scrolls games like Daggerfall.
Mhm.
That was the one I was thinking of because I'm like, I don't remember which game it is, but I know I've seen game covers that were almost exactly like this. But no, I mean, like we were saying last week, everybody steals from each other.
Yeah.
Whether it be riffs or just general ideas or musical styles, like it all kind of melds together, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
It's when you start straight up ripping people off and not admitting it, then that's when people start getting upset about it, and should.
Yeah. And to be honest, it's metal musicians ripping off metal musicians isn't as much of a sin to me as the egregiousness of hip hop artists sampling, like straight. And I don't even consider it sampling. They're using other tracks by other musicians and passing it off as their original stuff, and that pisses me off because they never
Yeah,
ever.
it's like that's not creating music. That's re-editing someone else's work.
Which is why I say hip hop isn't necessarily music. It's just more poetry to somebody who created the music.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between like a lot of the older rap artists, like the '80s and '90s stuff that we grew up with, like NWA or the
Dr.
various
Dre.
components of Death Row.
That's why I love Dr. Dre.
Dre creates some
He,
absolute
he's the
bangers.
musician. He's the only like legit musician. Well, not only, but he's like a pure musician creating these beats, creating this music. And then he had his, the crew just come in and just, work with him on the lyrics.
Yeah, and he also did a lot of the beats behind the scenes for the other artists too, like a lot of Tupac stuff and
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of everybody else from Death Row. That was all Dre. But you lost that somewhere in the '90s. I think they stopped really um, focusing on that and just started, sampling beats either off of each other or off of other genres.
I'm not even talking beats. I'm talking Tupac changes. That's an entire.
Oh, it's straight.
Remember,
It's just that's a straight up cover of shit. Who did that?
Yeah, I can't remember either. But then you also have Puff Daddy with that has basically every breath you
Yeah,
take.
covering Sting.
Yeah, and then the funniest thing I
And
saw.
they all took that idea from Run DMC.
Oh, that's where it came from, wasn't it? Damn it! Fuck.
Yep. But they were actually doing it with Aerosmith's specific permission and with Aerosmith performing
In the music video.
Yeah, well, and I believe on the track as well. Like that was actually a different version of the song, or the same version of the song, but they were actually playing with Run DMC.
So they re-recorded it
them.
with.
Yeah, it
They
wasn't them
re-recorded that
ripping
song
the
with
recording.
Run. Okay, see that
It
even
wasn't.
legit.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that's legit and like a different take on a song. Whereas nowadays they'll just straight up take the recording off of somebody else's stuff and then remix it.
Yeah,
Which that's getting into some pretty shady territory.
Vanilla Ice did the same thing with his hit
With Queen. Yep.
Yep.
And there's actually a couple, not on this album, but one of the later ones. This is one of the reasons I say that Queen was proto power metal. Is there's a lot of bands in there that there's a lot of Queen influence, and on one of these albums, there's a straight up Queen cover.
There's a lot of Queen influence on the later albums coming up too. Once you get past like this early like speed metal period of Blind Guardian, and you start to get into the more like folk elements, you're gonna hear it. And then of course they have their own A Night at the Opera album.
Yeah.
What was that, like 2002 ish?
Yeah, I believe so. Actually,
Around that
look
time.
that up
So
real quick because I think I have it up here somewhere. Yeah, Night at the Opera, 2002.
yeah,
So clearly there was some influence there.
mm-hmm.
And there's some I believe on this album actually you have some covers as well, like Barbara Ann, right at the end of the album there. So covering some classic rock tunes as well. But you also have like some really heavy shit like Banished from Sanctuary or Follow the Blind.
Yeah, I was just about to say Follow the Blind was just fucking great.
And this album has, the first of what I would consider Blind Guardian's true, like, classic songs with Valhalla and Don't Break the Circle.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's just, like, Valhalla's straight up almost thrash metal.
All of this is really straight up thrash metal, to be honest.
And then, but Valhalla, you see the very beginnings of that folk influence come into at the outro with that acoustic outro, and you start hearing that folk side come in,
mm-hmm.
and it's much more. And clearly, they got a good response to it because not only is Valhalla played on every one of their live shows to this day, you start hearing a lot more of that come into their music after this.
Oh, have you seen them live?
I have not. I really want to. They don't tour in North America very often.
Okay.
So if I ever hear about them coming around, I will absolutely let you know. But I have never seen them live. One of my life's goals is to, actually get to go to Wacken one year.
Yeah, that's one of mine.
That's where these guys you'll usually see these guys is the European festival circuit.
So you Europeans have it so sweet when it comes to heavy metal.
They have all of these huge outdoor shows that everybody goes to,
and it's not like you have to travel that far to go see them all over Europe. All you have to do is just basically book a hotel and just take a train, and you're there.
Pretty much. And then, of course, they're playing the like 80,000 person soccer stadiums over here, where a big tour for a metal band in America is outside of like Metallica or something like that is playing like hockey arenas that are like 30,000 people.
Yeah. Or
maybe.
If you're a band like, I remember seeing Arch Enemy in 2008, I think it was, and they were playing, the club scene. And that's what happens with the European metal bands. It doesn't matter who you are. they're going to be playing just the smaller venues.
Yeah, and sometimes they like it that way, where you get a lot more personal interaction with the crowd when it comes to smaller venues.
I always thought, for me, I always thought it should, in my mind, it should reflect how great the band is. And it's sad sometimes because you see, this really great metal band. Like I went to see Primal Fear in 2016 at this. I don't know what the fuck happened with their tour manager. They were supposed to play at the DNA Lounge in San Francisco, which is a pretty good place to play. I mean, there's a lot of really good bands who usually play there, and their fucking promoter or tour manager or whoever did it switched it at the last second and placed it down at some like random place in Santa Cruz, which is like 50 miles south of San Francisco.
Oh, wow. So they didn't even just change the venue, they changed the location
They
too.
changed the location, and about half, because I had seen Primal Fear in 2010 and this was 2016, and they had half the amount of people there, and nobody was getting into Primal Fear, and I felt just bad for them.
Yeah,
So
and that sucks because Primal Fear is still creating killer content to this day, and it
they
seems like
have
they've kind
not
of fallen
released a
by the
bad
wayside.
album. Yeah, they are. I buy every single Primal Fear album when it comes out, and I have not been disappointed. I
And
prefer
same
their
thing with
older
Blind
stuff.
Guardian, really. I mean, they came out with an album last year. Almost nobody heard of it. Like all the guys I talked to that were all in the metal scene, they like I would bring up the fact that Blind Guardian released an album in 2022, and they're like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, exactly.
Like, so I think they've kind of peaked in terms of popularity, although you can never tell because a lot of albums will just go unnoticed, and then you'll have that one that hits just right, like Carpe Diem by Saxon, where everybody was talking about it. And yet, I knew a bunch of people at the time who had no idea Saxon was still a band.
Mhm.
Going into that, same thing with Accept, with Blood of the Nations and some of their newer stuff. Nobody realized they were still around.
I didn't even myself. I didn't realize Accept was still making music until Razorfist did the Accept Metal Mythos, and
Yeah,
then I bought Blood of the Nations, and I'm like,
and
holy
they've come up with
fuck, this is great.
they've come up with another one since then. They had an album in 2021, I think, towards the end.
Yeah, they had right after Carpe Diem, they had Stalingrad or some shit like that.
Stalingrad. Well, no. After Blood of the Nations, they had Stalingrad, and then another album after that. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but it
Yeah,
was
me too.
only like 2 years ago.
Yeah, but their most recent, the Too Mean to Die, was
Yes, that's it.
fucking great album, man. Every song on that album flows perfectly into the next, and it's
Absolutely savage too.
Yeah, you
And
Germans, you know how to make your metal.
mm-hmm. And these guys are no exception. The God Machine's actually a pretty good album.
Yeah,
I won't say it's their best work, but that's because of the absolute titanic quality of some of the albums we're about to get into here. Because these two, I mean, I would heavily encourage you all to listen to the first two albums. I thoroughly enjoyed both of them, but we haven't gotten to the good stuff yet. We're about to. Because here's the good stuff right here.
Yes.
Imaginations
from the Other Side.
Yeah, Imaginations from the Other Side. Is it?
Yeah.
These albums. Yeah. No, sorry. This is Tales from the Twilight World.
Oh, Tales from the fuck.
This is why
damn it, Blind Guardian. Why do you make your fucking album title so hard to remember?
Well, and also they don't put the album title on the freaking.
They do, but look, it's like written in like little fucking cursive on the bottom.
Twilight World, there it is. Not to mention, I always get this album title confused with the last album we're going to talk about today, Nightfall in Middle Earth. Because it's like, oh yeah, so I say Twilight from Middle Earth, which makes sense. It's not like I'm completely pulling that out of my ass, but it's like I always get them confused. Which again, you have like the traditional like heavy or the power metal feel just to the cover itself. I don't know if the same artist does all of these. Because there are like a bunch of stylistic differences, more so in the early stuff and less so going forward here.
Mhm.
Like so the artwork has a very consistent quality here. And the other influence on the early stuff, it really starts showing up on the second and third albums,
Yeah.
is Iron Maiden.
I didn't hear any Maiden influence.
I can hear a lot of it on this album.
Oh, the later albums, yes, but not on the first two.
There's a
It
little
wasn't
on the
until
first
this
couple, but that's
Tales
because
from.
it's Maiden.
Oh, go ahead.
No, there's a little bit on the first two, but that's because it's Iron Maiden and everybody was listening to them.
Mhm.
This is where it really starts becoming apparent.
Okay.
And
I would
then
agree. I would totally agree with that because there is that Iron Maiden and Queen.
there's a lot of
You're
Queen
starting to
here.
get a
There's a
lot
lot
of
of
Queen,
Dio in here too.
a lot of Dio.
And like
This back album art reminds me of the Last of Mine back album art from
yeah,
Dio.
quite a bit actually. Now that you mention it, I hadn't noticed that. And well, they come right out and say say it. They have straight up "The Lord of the Rings" as one of as one of the songs, and a good one as well.
Mhm.
I would say that probably my favorite out of these is maybe "Lost in the Twilight Hall." Although
That's a
Tommy
good one.
Knockers is also a really good one. It's hard to pick because there's not a bad song on this record.
No, I really like Travelers in Time and Welcome to the Dying. I think that's like really good 1-2 punch to really kick off the album.
Yeah.
And the rest of it doesn't quite hit that high for me, but it's still very consistent
Yeah,
throughout.
well, I mean, that's always how it's supposed to be with a record too. You want your really, really high quality stuff right at the start, and then to get people into the mindset and get people into the album, and then you go to the maybe not best song in the album, but a little more creative and a little different, and sometimes a lot of the slower stuff. And it's a very, very solid record. This is where you start to see a lot of the true power metal come out of Blind Guardian. Whereas before they were borderline thrash or speed metal, like this is where power metal starts to become its own sound.
Yes.
And I believe this is only 1990, so we're only 2 years into this band's recording career, and there you can already see the DNA of this band coming to the fore, which I think is awesome. And then you have, again, the art is part of the experience when it comes to metal, and really high quality here. Like the artwork on this album is really good, really well done, and fits the tone of the album extremely well.
Yeah.
Hey Fizz, how's it going, man? Good to see you here as always. And then you have like straight up bangers like Tommy Knockers in the middle there.
The funny thing about Tommy Knockers is it's based on Stephen King's book of the same name.
And it also sounds like there's a lot of punk influence there. Like in the sonic qualities of it, it's more of a punk song than traditional power metal, which is not something you normally associate with this genre. Which is interesting.
I didn't notice that at first because with Hansi, every time he sings, I just think, okay, power metal, because the way he's. I mean, would you recognize some of the stuff from? Well, I was going to say Sex Pistols. Of course, you recognize that punk, but if it was a punk band with like fucking let's say Hansi, you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, punk at first. You'd be like, what the fuck is this? It's heavy metal, right? It's got to be heavy metal because it's.
Well, yeah, you'd think so because like they have that. Well, I mean, there's a fine line between punk and metal at some junctures.
Yeah, but punk
you
and
can almost consider a lot of Kill 'Em All borderline punk stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Kill 'Em All is basically a straight up Motorhead tribute album.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, well, let's face it. Motorhead, the only Grammy they ever won was actually a cover of Whiplash.
Isn't that a fucking?
That's a kick in the nuts almost. When the only Grammy you ever win is for a cover you do.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like the same kick in the nuts they gave Dave Mustaine when he won his Grammy, and they're playing Master of Puppets.
It's just like, you motherfuckers. Out of all of the shit I've done, you're gonna go with that one?
Yeah, exactly.
And look, let's face it, like that's after he did Rust in Peace too. It's like this man has more than enough absolute classics to his name. Why are you doing that?
Oh, I was talking about the most recent one with Dystopia in 2016.
Oh,
He
that's
wanted
right. Yeah, I forgot he won one in
that
2016
was the
too.
situation. They were when he won, the music that they played as he was walking up to accept the award was Master of Puppets.
Which wasn't even one of the ones he wrote.
It wasn't. He had no contributing.
At least the first two records, he had like a lot of the music was already written, and that was mostly him. On this one, but Master of Puppets, he wasn't even on. Like he didn't even have a hand in.
It's just so disrespectful because we're 50, at least 50 years in to the establishment and creation of heavy metal. It's the arguably the most popular genre worldwide. Okay,
It's certainly up there in terms
I mean,
of
there's.
how widespread it is. Like,
I mean,
there are
are
certain
you really
styles of
going to?
music that only fit within certain cultures and certain areas of the world. There are metal bands from absolutely fucking everywhere. I heard one not too long ago from Nepal, which was
Oh, the
absolutely
ones
fucking
I think I
sick.
know. I think I know the one you're talking about. The guys who use like traditional Tibetan instruments.
There's more than one of those.
There's more.
Like absolutely, yeah.
See what I mean? For like more than when you are popular on several fucking continents. I'm not talking countries. I'm talking continents. Asia, Australia,
And
South America.
everybody has like their own twist to it as well. Like that's why there's like why it's spun out into like 80 different subgenres of music that are all kind of under the same umbrella.
Mhm.
Is like it's such a creative style, and there's so many possibilities with this kind of music that you can just go any way you want with it and come up with something cool. Like you
And I
want
think
dark and
that's
evil, black metal's right over there. You want
mhm.
inspiring and kind of fantasy oriented, power metal. Well, we're talking about it right now. You just want to party and have fun. Well, trad heavy and hair metal's right over the corner. Like it's
And it's
got
all
something
rock and
for
roll.
everybody,
And it's
and
all
it's
rock
all
and
rock
roll,
and roll.
which tells you rock and roll is worldwide the most popular form of music.
It is the
Period.
embodiment of Western culture in a lot of ways. Of
Yeah.
especially like focusing on the power of the individual and being your own person and stuff like that, where that you don't get elsewhere in the world.
And it's energetic. Rock and roll if you go back to like the 50s when it was first coming out, and I'm proud that it's the United States that created rock and roll. You can
Well,
say everything about everything else.
we'll get into that in its own episode, on more of a deeper level, because
Oh, I know we will. I absolutely know we will. And look forward to that, guys, because that'll be an epic live stream too. But I just want to say
that's going to be a huge one.
I am
And
proud as an American that we created rock and roll, of which everything else is built on.
yeah, and when you look at it, given the formation and how rock and roll started, America is the only place it could have happened.
Yes.
Like just the confluence of musical styles and people, and given the artistic and um, publishing freedom that the West or that America has, it's probably the only place it could happen when it did.
It's also a
And
reverent
it
kind of
all,
music.
and that's one of the reasons I fucking love. To this day, I still listen to a lot of 50s and 60s rockabilly stuff because it's fun. It's fun music.
It is. It's fun. It's energetic. Some of it is just, irreverent. Some of it is rebellious.
It's
And,
all,
and
and the funny part is you'll still hear 50s rock and roll tunes played and covered to this day by bands like this.
mhm.
I mean, hell, on the last album you had a cover of Barbara Ann by the Beach Boys.
As you were mentioning, yeah.
Would you expect an 80s power metal band to be covering the Beach Boys?
Not
And yet, if you
necessarily.
strip away some of the distortion, a lot of black metal is literally just surf rock musically. Like especially on the guitar style, it's just that tremolo picking work, and it sounds like surf rock. There's a video I'll share with you after the stream that I'll have to find, but it's
Yeah, because what you just
absolutely
said blew my mind. I was like, what?
yeah, it's literally some of the second wave black metal stuff, or even some of the first wave stuff, played by like without the distortion, and it's straight up surf rock. I'm like, what? It
Yeah.
blew my mind when I first saw it too. But like, that's the cool part with this genre of music is once you know where the roots are, it all makes sense in terms of how it spread out and how it built and all that. And the one influence I haven't heard on up to this point, and yet it will come in later, is the doom metal side of the house. That kind of slower, darker tone hasn't really crept its way in yet. On the later records, you'll hear it.
And Hansi's voice actually works.
It works very well for that style.
It works very well for that, and you wouldn't immediately think that, but it really does.
And Hansi's voice is interesting, where he doesn't have a super high voice. It's not super clean. But it's also not that like death metal howl. It's kind of in this middle ground that makes it really versatile.
And it's instantly recognizable too.
Yep.
Nobody sounds like Hansi Kirsch.
Yeah, once you know what Hansi Kirsch's voice sounds like, whether it's this or Demons and Wizards, you will immediately know it. And it just makes me so sad that we're never going to get another Demons and Wizards album now. Because all three of those were amazing.
Imagine releasing records like multiple years apart, and they're oh man. And I hope you're wrong. I pray you're wrong. I pray you're wrong because it'll never happen because of what Hansi said about John.
Yeah, I don't know that John and Hansi are ever gonna.
No, that's what Hansi did was, in my opinion, the ultimate betrayal. He didn't wait for any kind of other side story to come out. He just immediately.
He didn't even wait till John was out of prison before he freaking started talking shit.
Guys, imagine knowing somebody for over 30 years. You've toured together. You've smelled. I mean, you've known each other. Your kids know your kids, and you just say some. You just side with what the media said just because the media said it, and you don't even question it. You don't question. I mean,
you don't even give the man a chance to explain.
You don't even give a man the chance to explain what went down. To hear his side of the story. That's just bullshit to me, man.
Yeah, that's one of those like I don't understand how that played out the way it did, and hopefully hopefully they've talked since and settled that shit out. But as it stands now, I don't think we're ever going to get another Demons and Wizards album, and we'll talk about them at some point, probably in the not too distant future. And oh, that's going to be a shame because when it comes to power metal, they are like the modern, like
super
exemplar of what power metal should always be.
I mean, they are the original. I mean, it's so hard to genreify John Schaefer and Iced Earth because they are so many things.
And they have they fit into so many buckets at the same time. Like you could easily consider a lot of their stuff thrash. You could easily consider a lot of their stuff speed metal.
Burnt Offerings is straight up death metal in some parts.
Yeah, which makes sense given where Schaefer's from.
Yeah,
and that Florida death metal scene.
Well, he started in Tampa Bay, Florida, after a movie from Indiana. I'm a huge Iced Earth mark. I'm sorry. We're going to get back on topic. We're going to get into Iced Earth too, because like I'm a huge power metal nerd as well, and Iced Earth is a huge part of that genre from the same time period. Yes,
and yet the American and European power metal scenes don't seem to take a lot of influence from each other.
No, they're completely unique. And
a lot of the American influence is a lot more biblical and using more like religious imagery, whereas a lot of the Euro power metal is mostly focused on fantasy and stuff like that. Maybe it's that connection to the medieval world that like just has that sword and sorcery mindset.
And Germanic folklore is huge. I mean, it's one of the biggest collection of folk tales that you'll find anywhere in Europe.
And their metal is fucked because like a lot of like Grimm's fairy tales that we all heard the like Disney version of as kids, that shit gets metal as fuck.
Some of it just brutal. Eating kids, all
Yeah, like none of those fairy tales have the same endings when you read the actual stories from the German or from German translations that we're used to as Disney kids. Like Hansel and Gretel has a very, very dark ending, which probably speaks a little bit to who Germans are as a people. They're not very happy. But no, I mean, moving on to this next one, this is where you really start seeing a
this.
lot of folk influence come
Yeah,
in with
this
Somewhere
this
Far Beyond.
this is the one for me. This is this is the album where Blind Guardian becomes the Blind Guardian as we really know them today.
Well, I mean,
Similar to
this is where they really like power metal really found its feet and started being its own thing.
really, yeah.
And it has something for everyone on this record too. If you like the slow, more acoustic stuff, the Bard song is on this freaking record.
That's played in every concert too that they played.
Oh yeah, it's usually played as the intro for Valhalla, which is interesting. But
okay.
And you like, I would love to have this one too, that has the remaster and the original recordings side by side on the same CD or on the same two CDs.
That's
But
cool.
you want, like I said, you want the folk metal stuff, the Bard songs on this album. You want more of the heavier stuff, heavier, faster stuff. You have Journey Through the Dark and Theater of Pain on this record.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just got something for everybody. And there's a little bit of doom influence on some of this stuff too. Ashes to Ashes has a little bit of a darker tone to it.
I would say darker. Okay, I can hear what you're saying. I'll have to go back and re-listen to it. But I guess I wasn't paying attention as much as I should have been. But I'll take your word for it.
I might be a little wrong on that too. Like I said, these songs all bleed into each other very, very seamlessly. So, with the exception,
I might have thought. Here's the thing: I might have thought it was part of another song, not realizing it was its own individual track.
Yeah, where it's just like, wait a minute, this is a new song now. Okay,
right.
With the exception of the Piper's Calling, where the bagpipes are kind of a dead giveaway.
Yeah, that got a little like, oh, come on, guys.
Yeah. That was, I mean, me being
at least it was
Irish,
only 58 seconds. So,
yeah, me being half Irish, the bagpipes are something that appeals to me. So like I said, there's something for everyone on this record.
Yeah, bagpipes and that traditional Irish. What the fuck? The guy from the guy that they brought in permanently from Nightwish plays this instrument, and it's an Irish instrument.
Oh yeah, I know the one you're talking about, but I can't.
It's like a flute, but it's not a flute.
Yeah, they call it something different, but it is essentially a flute.
Yeah, and it sounds better than a flute, in my opinion.
Yeah, it has a slightly different tone to it.
Almost like a sweeter tone, like a brighter tone, whereas a flute is just cold and loud. It's a brass instrument, basically.
Yeah, and then the title track, Somewhere Far Beyond, is just this fantasy masterpiece.
Yeah, I really like. This is why I even put it on Twitter. I said this is my absolute favorite fucking Blind Guardian of the first six.
Yeah, and
go filler album. It's where the band.
It's not my favorite, but I can certainly see. Whereas, like, if you're looking to, especially to get someone into Blind Guardian, hand them this record.
Yes,
because this is kind of a grab bag of everything they do well.
Yes, trust us, guys. We're the experts.
Yeah, expert is a strong term, but
Yeah, I know I'm being hyperbolic.
Me calling me an expert on anything is kind of one of those. Like, I don't know if you know what that word really means.
Well, you'd be surprised how much you know about subjects. I mean, know some of the subjects you know about. I was surprised because I know the same subject, but you know like way more than me. So there's always somebody who is more of an expert. Trust me.
This is true. There's always somebody who knows more about something than you. This is why we usually have 70s on the show, because he was around when a lot of this stuff came out, so he has a perspective on it that we'll never know.
Yeah.
Oh, the tin whistle. Yes, that's what they call it.
Yeah, I think. Yep, I love that.
That is a very cool sound, and it's a very uniquely Irish sound as well,
Mm-hmm.
which is cool because they're bringing in sounds that are not just like German or straight up heavy metal. They're also reaching out to other parts of the world and incorporating other instruments and other sounds into their music, which is something that power metal does very, very well. One thing I've noticed about Blind Guardian is that they're one of those power metal bands that doesn't focus very heavily on the keyboard, which is unusual.
Mm.
And yet it is there, but it's not emphasized like it is in, say, like Sabaton or Hammerfall stuff or stuff like
So
that.
they're similar to like Ice Earth and how they have the keyboardist behind the stage so you can't see them.
Yeah, like it's in the back, but it's there.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Sabaton, I believe they kind of dub the keyboard loop in when they're playing live because their keyboardist is Joaquin.
Okay.
Unless they hire a tour guy to play keyboards on tour with them, but yeah, he's busy.
Cool. I didn't know Joaquin did the keys. That's
all the
awesome.
keyboard. He was originally the keyboard player, and then, as he tells it, they needed a vocalist to do a demo,
mm-hmm.
and they didn't have a singer. So they're like, "Oh yeah, well, can you just sing on these tracks, and then we'll find a singer down the way." And then, as he tells it, the lazy bastards never went out and found a singer, so I got stuck with it.
Same thing happened with Megadeth. Same thing happened with Metallica. That was the plan, but they went with the backup.
Yeah, we need a singer to do vocals for a demo because we want to actually record one and actually get this band going, and they didn't have a singer, so somebody got stuck with it, and it just kind of never changed.
Right.
But in this case, Hansi was initially the bass player as well.
Oh, okay.
So a long tradition of bass players also being the lead singer.
Yep.
Long and proud tradition that goes all the way back to Motorhead and Rush in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Rush, and you could even say Deep Purple because after
that's right. Yeah, Ian Gillan left.
They basically split the singing duties between the White David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, after Ian Gillan left.
Yeah.
And then Glenn Hughes would go on to sing with Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
For one album, one really, really solid album that is way underrated, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, Born Again.
We will get to that record when we start doing Sabbath, because that's going to be a very special time. But no, I mean, this album, I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, if you're a fan of Blind Guardian already,
you know what we're talking
the track
about,
list, yeah. You know all of these songs. Because I mean, they're played in their live set today for a reason. Like, this is their true classic output. Like, this is where, like you say, Blind Guardian starts being Blind Guardian as we know them.
Yeah.
Not to say any of the ones we've talked about now are bad albums or not really true to what Blind Guardian is, but it was building to this. I would heavily recommend every album we talk about today because I thoroughly enjoyed listening to all 6. But this is where you start to see the real fantasy side of Blind Guardian come out of the woodwork.
And as they get better engineers and producers to really find to the album's heaviness, it really hits even harder when
that's one thing I haven't mentioned before now too, is their production quality has a massive jump on this record.
Yes, that's what I know. See, for me, when it really helps me fully embrace a record based on the production quality, because if I can't hear things really clearly, or something is too low, or just not, has a high enough definition. That's why I like remasters so much. When they're done well, there's bad remasters and there's good remasters, and that's kind of that might be a good subject later. But bottom line is, the better you can get You can get your stuff engineered in the studio to the point where it translates better to the album. It'll make it that much easier for the listener to really get into it because they don't have to focus on any lack of recording quality. All they're listening to is your ideas put to tape.
And for the music nerds like us out there, it's even more fun for us because we get to hear a lot more of what went into the album, of like, oh, that's a really cool bass line, or like, oh, is that a freaking like a tin whistle in the background? Like it really just helps bring the sound forward and lets you experience it in a way that you wouldn't get to with a more raw recording.
Mm.
Which they both have their place. I mean, black metal is famous for being unproduced as hell and
That's its
really
charm.
muddy in terms of some, and that fits for that genre. Whereas power metal wants to be like the more produced side of the house because you do have a lot more complex sound. Like there's a lot of keyboards in there. There's a lot of medieval instruments that get mixed in, and it really creates this fuller sound. This is really where you see the start of their journeys into symphonic metal as well.
I would agree with that absolutely.
And if you're wondering where bands like Nightwish, Arch Enemy, Delane, all the symphonic bands get their influences, these guys are where it starts. Or this era of power metal in the early 1990s.
Yeah, the early 1990s era of power metal. I know the Nightwish guy Thomas was the biggest influence that made him want to do this kind of music was Metallica's The Black Album, believe it or not.
And that's an interesting jump from that. Well, I can see where the symphonic would fit with that style
because it's so well produced and you can hear every instrument and it's heavy as fuck, but it sounds professional and it's engineered well. Engineers don't get enough love.
Sound engineers and roadies are the unsung heroes of heavy metal.
Yes,
because like these guys can turn an average output into an absolutely stellar album with just a couple of turns of a knob and knowing exactly how to manipulate mixes to make sure everything's balanced out well and shit like that.
Not
like,
just
these
that.
guys
I'm talking mic. I'm not just that. I'm talking mic placement. I'm talking the different ideas of using 2 amps and should we set the mic here or should we use a condenser mic here to kind of capture it, or when we go to record in the recording studio, should we record in a sound dampened room where the sound is really controlled, or should we do more of a big kind of room where we can get like a bigger, fuller live sound? There's so much that can go into making it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's all also like where you choose to record, because some of these albums are not recorded in like your typical studio setting. Like I think one of Sin After Sin by Judas Priest, another album we will get to eventually because it's one of my favorites.
Recorded in a bar,
recorded in the church.
Oh, church, that's right.
It was recorded in like this old stone church, which must have been really interesting for the sound engineers to play with.
Yeah,
because a lot of those old churches that existed pre-20th century and pre-microphone, they had to be set up for acoustics so that everybody in the back could hear the priest.
Hear the preacher talking. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's actually a good place to record. If you're going to record, you want something to really, if you want
have that like echoey kind of epic sound to it,
an echoey epic sound where it's boomy and everything. You don't need reverb because everything is naturally reverbing through the mix. To be honest.
Yeah, Soul Assassin. I think a lot of veterans do end up being, stagehands and stuff like that. Not only because it's a decent paying job. A lot of us are metalheads ourselves, and let's face it, we're used to organized chaos.
God bless them.
And just getting stuff where it needs to be when it needs to be there, and dealing with last minute, especially equipment failures and stuff like that. Like, oh, this isn't working. Oh shit! All right.
Yeah. Can you imagine being do you remember this is a little off topic, but it's going to be short. Do you remember the Ronnie Radcliffe guy from Falling in Reverse? He couldn't play a show because his fucking laptop wasn't available.
Yeah.
That kind of shit. Now, a real tour manager would have like multiple backups, not of just laptops, but stuff that would allow the band to at least play some of their more programmed stuff without the need for laptop. Because listen, laptops break all the time. Motherboards get fried, shit happens,
I
whatever.
mean, you guys see it on YouTube all the time where, StreamYard or some shit will just either stop working or have one setting wrong and it fucks the whole thing up, and
Yeah,
you got to just roll with it.
yeah.
And especially when you're dealing with like things like tube type amps and stuff like that, tubes break all the time.
Hmm.
Like in the middle of a set,
It happens.
a tube can just pop and you have to switch back over to a backup that's behind the stage somewhere.
Yeah,
And you're
usually
ready at a
solid.
moment's notice.
Yeah,
And that shit has to all be switched on and basically ready to go at
yeah.
the
Because
push of a
doesn't the
couple of
tube
buttons.
have to be really warm, in sync with the other temperatures of the other tubes to really kind of keep the sound consistent?
Yep. And these things, it's not one of those things like, modern technology where you can just turn it on and it starts working. You turn on, I mean, I have a tube amp, and you turn that thing on and you got to let it warm up for like 10,
Yeah, you got
15
to let it
minutes.
warm up. I played with
It
other
takes like
guitarists.
10, 15 minutes before you can actually like
It really
use it.
does. And it's actually nice because in the winter, you don't need, if you've got a cold recording space, you don't necessarily need a heater. You can just,
Yeah, if you've
turn
got a
on your
big
tube amps.
if you got a bigger tube type amp in a small room, you don't really need a heater. That thing
Yeah,
will take care of the problem.
a couple of my old guitars from previous bands had Mesa Boogies, and those things were great for that.
I can only imagine how hot some of these recording studios must get too, because you have like 8 full stack amps cranked to the absolute gills, all crammed into this tiny space, along with like five or six people and the freaking sound engineers. So some of those rooms must get pretty toasty at times.
And then you're trying
Almost everybody uses tube type equipment.
Yeah. And then you're dealing with the stress of recording sometimes where, 10, 15 takes, you're not quite getting it. And you're not sure whether or not you should be playing certain notes or whatever kind of thing.
Yeah, and your guitar, like your musicians are starting to sweat because they've done 15 takes of this extremely fast-paced shit. Your
And
drummer's
everybody's getting
probably
annoyed with each other at that time. So yeah, it's hard.
Your drummer's probably dying because he's right next to all the amps, and he's been losing his fucking mind on a drum kit for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Especially with some of the speed and power metal stuff where it's all double bass and blast beats.
Yeah.
Where it's just, like, between every song on some of this stuff, you can almost feel the drummer behind the kit. Like, is it over yet? That's why in some of these songs, you'll hear like a slower section. It's probably to let the drummer catch his breath.
Yeah.
Because he's been basically running behind the kit for like 2-3 minutes.
Yep.
This is definitely not a genre for the out of shape drum guy.
No, it's not.
Which some of the singers put on a little weight, which is interesting. Like Vince Neil, who looks like he ate Vince Neil. Especially for like guitar work, your forearms have to be strong as hell to do all that work for that long, and really, really, I'm trying to say, like, it takes a lot of physical effort to play this kind of music. Like, it's not just talent and musical skill; it's also practice and physical conditioning. Like, I mean, like when you first start playing guitar, first of all, your fingers are going to bleed. Like you're gonna until those calluses develop on your fingers, especially on your playing hand, you're going to have a lot of problems playing for more than 5-10 minutes at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And
even when you get
good at it, your right arm. I mean, if you're a right-handed player like I am, just holding a pick and doing that precision work for that long, eventually your freaking wrists are going to get your forearms are going to get tired.
Yep.
and even on your playing hand, you're constantly gripping strings and putting your hand through contortions that are not natural in any way, shape, or form, especially if you got these big freaking bear paws like I do.
Yeah.
It's a very physical, especially playing heavy metal. It's a very physically intensive activity.
It really is. I mean, that's why you're not going to see a lot of drummers past the age of 60 still playing live in a band consistently. Nico
Yeah,
and Brain, but Nico is a fucking freak. He's
just a freak of nature at this point.
He's a freak of nature. He's like 71 years old, still playing.
I'm not sure how he does what he does, but he's still doing it and mostly pretty good. So,
what I heard was he used to drink a lot, and he stopped drinking and like really cut way back on it in 2015, and it's like added another like 10 prime years to his drumming.
Well,
really cut it out. That's genius. That's what you got to do if you're really serious about committing yourself to music and an instrument and all of that. You don't party. You don't do a lot of that stuff. You might have a little nightcap on the weekends, but you are consistently training yourself no differently than you would be training for a marathon or training for a spelling bee. You're training to execute at the highest level, and you don't want to be foggy for that.
Yeah, and especially that's how guys get kicked out of bands. Like if you're partying between shows, whatever, it's fine. But like a lot of, especially guitar players or drummers, you show up drunk to a gig, you're done.
Yeah.
If you play like shit one night and they ask you why and you're clearly drunk, you're gone.
Yeah.
Because that's just not acceptable. I mean, it depends on who you are too. Like if it's your band, obviously they can't kick you out, but
it also depends on the substance too. If you show up to your gig and you're on like speed, no problem. You'll know everything. You'll be fine.
You're good to go. But like not everybody can be Lemmy that just has a Jack and Coke on his amp constantly.
Yeah, that's true.
And handle it. And he had like 3 before the show.
Exactly.
No, Soul Assassin, Lemmy didn't get kicked out for using speed. He got caught because he couldn't make a show because he got caught at the border with speed. There is a difference there. And he got bailed out and basically couldn't make the show in time, so they fired him. Which for all involved was actually probably the best thing that could have happened because we got Motorhead out of that deal.
It's so fucking weird how a really shitty circumstance that you really can't see the other side of can really be a blessing in disguise. That's just something I think about sometimes because I'll be going through like a shitty series of events and then it leads to something wonderful later that you look back on.
It's all the silver lining.
Yeah.
And you got the difference between guys like Lemmy and people who let that be the end of their career is basically finding that silver lining and picking yourself up and moving on rather than just leaving.
Yeah.
But now getting back to Blind Guardian, I mean, this album, absolute classic, belongs in pretty much every metalhead's collection, in my opinion. And certainly if you're a fan of power metal, you need to own it.
Right.
And that continues kind of with Imaginations from the Other Side.
Oh, absolutely.
This one's a little harder and heavier than the last one, but still very folk focused and fantasy, high fantasy and all that.
And the same theme of the album's title on a little portion of the album near the bottom that you can hardly see. Imaginations from the Other Side on the cover of the book. See that?
Yep.
So they've got that going for their consistency. And yes, this album is a definite continuation. It's a more evolved version, I would say, of the previous. And even though I don't like the songs on this album as much, I would definitely say additionally the production quality has continued to get better.
Yeah, and this, I mean, this is the period too where you would have like songs that are long enough that you need a double vinyl for this. I mean, because some of these songs are like 5, 6, 7 minutes long, and on a vinyl record you only have like 45 minutes on both sides. So it comes to the point where you need to do a double album.
Yeah.
And that's certainly something that you have to consider when you're writing your songs for a record is runtime. Because
And
a
also
double
people,
vinyl is a lot more expensive to produce than a single record.
people collect vinyl, so you have to. I don't think personally. I don't collect vinyl. I prefer CD. But if people if you're writing songs to write songs and you're not writing like a concept album or something like that, you're just writing it, track by track by track. It becomes a little easier to sort of plan out, what's going to be on side A, what's going to be on side B, how the album will actually flow together, and how it will
I'll be
actually come
right
across
back.
to somebody, and how it will actually come across to somebody on who listens to vinyl. Whereas with CD, I like to listen from beginning to end, and there's no break or inconsistency. Everything kind of flows into the next. So it's a different listening experience because if you're back in the day, the way bands would do it, and I think Pope would absolutely agree with me, is you would have side A, and you would have the musicians would come up with the song track listing for side A, and how that would set the tone for the first part of the album, and then they would flip it and do side B. But side B had to sort of almost could, but most of the time did reflect the kind of thinking that you had on side A. It's like, okay, the series of songs has to come out in a way that reflected side A. So if we came out with a more kind of punchy start, maybe it'd be best to do that on side B and kind of continue that. Metallica, great example of this. Metallica Ride the Lightning. First 4 tracks, you would have Fight Fire with Fire to Fade to Black. And then you flip that, and then the next song, the first song that you're hearing on side B is what? Trapped Under Ice.
Yeah, I mean, this is a lost art in terms of
It really is.
composition and production of a record is arranging songs in a way that people want to keep listening to flip the record and see what comes next.
Yeah.
And it's something that has, like I said, kind of been a lost art because with the advent of CDs and now streaming, you don't need to do that. So a lot of bands don't put the effort into it. And I think that lack of effort is what makes, an average album or an average band into a true legend. Is that extra attention to detail and that extra effort. Because it shows that craftsmanship and that level of
care. I would just say care for the audience and listener.
Care about the music, that you took the time to actually do this, even though you really didn't need to. And I think that can turn an album from okay or pretty good to an absolute classic.
I would agree. I mean, the way you approach that is the same way bands approach set lists. Because if you're just picking a great live show, doesn't always have to necessarily depend on the quality of the gear. For me, that is almost less important than the songs being played and which songs you've chosen to play. I like Anthrax a lot, but they couldn't come up with a good set list to save their life, especially when thrash really came back around the late 2000s, early 2010s. They still had the same kind of set list they had through all their like previous tours. Megadeth has gotten lazy about this too, by the way.
And with a lot of bands too, it becomes difficult once you get later on in your career. It becomes really difficult to pick a set list. Because, I mean, when you look at bands like Saxon, how do you even come up with a set list when you have 21 studio albums?
Fuck.
And and half of it's classic material, and people are going to want to hear it.
Yeah, that is a pickle.
And like, let's face it,
That's a good pickle to have, because if you've been around that long,
I mean, like a Priest set, nobody's going to be 100% happy with any set that Judas Priest plays, because there's going to be at least one song that they really wanted to hear live that you couldn't fit into the set list that night.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, though, they did a damn good job of it this last time. Like,
that's why I'm so jealous, because I know the set list they played at your show, and I was just like, damn, I missed it.
Oh, dude. And like, obviously, half of it was Screaming for Vengeance, with both Sentinel and myself are,
yes,
shall we say, positively inclined towards.
We're very positively inclined towards. We are advocates of the biblical,
my favorite heavy metal record of all time.
It is like we've said, 100,000 years from now, when humanity's extinct and aliens from other civilizations are studying this, and they want to know, what is this heavy metal genre that these humans made? Is there something that can kind of encapsulate it all for us? Hand them this record.
Yeah, pretty
Screaming
much.
for Vengeance is the heavy metal record you give aliens from different civilizations as the definitive, okay, this is heavy metal music.
Yeah, it's like when people ask like, what does heavy metal sound like? Just play the Hellion and Electric Eye for them, and yes,
yes, amen.
And I love how they didn't even just stop with Hellion and Electric Eye. They went right into Riding on the Wind.
Again, an album with a perfect track placement. She's side A and then side B.
And then you get a little bit slower with, Bloodstone, Independent Pleasure, and Take These
Chains. Yeah.
It's just the perfect progression.
And what's funny is, if you're listening to side B of Screaming for Vengeance, like you might in when it came out in 1982, it starts with a couple slower songs. You Take These Chains, and but then right in the middle of that side B is Screaming for Vengeance. So imagine just getting
which they also played that night.
Yeah. So,
and the fact that Rob is still hitting some of the notes he hit in, like that scream and Screaming for Vengeance, he still hits it at 71 years old.
God bless him.
The man is just a machine. But and I hope these guys are still that sharp when they're on their 50th anniversary tour, and I hope they'll be around long enough that they have a 50th anniversary tour.
Yeah. That's the great thing about heavy metal, is we're not ageist at all. We want you to be around forever. We don't. I would give a damn if they were 85 still playing.
I know rap fans who are like, "Oh, that guy's been out for 5-6 years. I don't really care."
Yeah.
We'll intentionally go listen to the 40-year-old shit because it's really fucking good.
Yeah. Or the hip hop. If once you turn 40, nobody really gives a shit unless you're like Eminem or something like that.
Yeah.
And same with pop music. It's like once they're in their 40s, nobody really gives a shit anymore. So it's very
once you've sold records and stuff like that, nobody really cares.
Nobody,
because they don't have fans. It's just like, oh yeah, this is the new popular thing, and everybody listens to it and then forgets about it 5 minutes after it's gone.
Country is very similar to metal in that way, and I appreciate that. That's really the only thing I really appreciate about country is its respect for the musicians. They don't give a shit about how old you are. They love the music. They love they love talking about, older albums from the 70s, if you started way back then.
Yeah, and you'll hear artists today referencing Waylon Jennings, George Strait, Johnny Cash, obviously.
Johnny Cash, absolutely. Yeah.
Willie Nelson.
Mm-hmm.
They respect where their music came from, and that's something that metalheads can fully understand, because metalheads on average know more about where their music came from and the history of it than your average fan outside of rock and roll.
Totally agree.
The only ones I would say that are more connected to the roots of their music are blues fans, because blues fans are all musicians, every single fucking one of them. Everyone I've ever met, if you like blues, you are a musician, and usually a guitar player, because that's the guitar player's style.
Mm-hmm.
It's really
where it all comes from.
Yeah, it's
comes from.
And when you look at it, a lot of metal fans are also blues fans. I'm one of them, where it's all rock and metal comes from blues.
Oh, and by the way, if you're a Black Sabbath fan, you're also a blues fan.
Yep, pretty much. They started as a blues band named Earth in, what was it, 67?
Yep. And they kept all those blues elements throughout their heavy metal days, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you look at their first album, it's really just extremely heavy blues.
Slow, doomy, heavy metal blues with heavy, heavy distortion.
With a lot of bending.
Ozzy sounds like a freaking demon, but guess what? Ozzy is a blues singer.
Yeah, a lot of hammer-ons, a lot of bending.
Yep.
Like Black Sabbath, the song Black Sabbath itself, one of the first riffs I ever learned to play. And it's just this big, titanic, doomy track of just like this ominous sound of something is coming to get you.
Mm-hmm.
That really epitomizes doom, like we were saying in the Candlemass show. I mean, just that side of the music. You don't, and I do like that for its own thing. And then power metal is sort of its, like we'll put it as doom metal is the evil twin, and then power metal is its polar opposite, where it's very bright, it's very fast, it's very aspirational in a lot of ways.
Yes, I would agree with that. And it's not like they're enemies; it's just more like they're natural, kind of.
They're natural opposites.
Yes.
And which is why they balance each other out very well. And if you get a band who can do both on a single album, that album almost instantly turns to gold.
If you ever find an example of that, let me know, because I'm curious to hear what that.
Well, I mean, Candlemass actually has more.
I was going to say Candlemass, but they are not strictly a power metal band. They started.
They do have a lot of power metal stuff, though. Like
I would agree with that absolutely. Especially when it comes to
like Into the Unfathomed Tower and stuff like that.
The Unfathomed Tower, yeah.
Which it's just straight up 3 minutes of Yngwie style guitar wankery. Which we need to cover him at some point too, especially.
Oh my god, I've got every Yngwie album. I'm ready to go.
Because that man is absolutely instrumental, especially his early albums, in the formation of power metal, especially in that neoclassical guitar style and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, you'll hear it on so many power metal records.
Marching Out is one of the greatest power metal albums I've ever heard, and that's Yngwie's second album as Yngwie's Rising Force. The first album is really just him, getting his Bach and Paganini influences out, because he really just needed to and it's really listenable too. Somewhere Far Beyond the Sun, Black Star, classics. I want to hear those instrumental songs played when I go see Yngwie, and luckily he played both when I did.
And you also have like the really powerful, like even just normal tracks he does that are extremely fast and extremely technical, like Faster Than the Speed of Light.
Faster Than the Speed of Light. We're going back to Marching Out. I would say, what the fuck is? I can't. Damn it, I can't remember right now. I would say it's the fourth track off of Marching Out. It's something with Hell.
Oh shit! I know the song you're talking about. I can't remember the name. It's been a long time since I've dug into it.
It's got a great acoustic intro.
Yep, I know the one you're talking about too. Shit. Yeah, it'll come to us eventually. If not, we'll get to it in the show.
Yep.
But you can clearly hear that influence on bands like Blind Guardian, Helloween, and stuff like that, where you can hear the classical and Baroque influences here.
Yes.
Where they're doing it more with electric guitars and stuff like that, and you can hear the symphonic influence as well.
Yes, it's starting to really kind of, at this point, it's kind of just like peeking above the fence a little bit.
Disciples in Hell. That's it. Soul Assassin.
Yes, thank you, Soul Assassin. Disciples of Hell.
I don't know why we didn't remember that one, but yes, that is the one. In fact,
we're getting old. We're getting old, man.
Yeah, well, these things happen.
It happens. It happens to everybody,
especially when you have as many concussions as I do.
Well, my problem is I'm just like really foggy right now, and I'm just I have no excuse. I'm just foggy.
I just have a little bit of the Dane Bramage. Not that I was
I have
ever all
no
that bright to
excuse.
begin with. But yeah, and then moving into the last album we're going to talk about today, this absolute masterpiece in Nightfall and Middle Earth.
Yes.
And oh man, I mean, when you look at the track listings, this could not be more Tolkien inspired if they wanted it to. I mean, let's face it, War of Wrath, freaking Lameth, The Curse of Feanor, like,
Yeah.
the absolute titan that is Mirror Mirror. Because yes, that
Probably the
song
best
on this
track on the
record.
album for me is Mirror Mirror.
Oh, Mirror Mirror is like to me the best Blind Guardian song of all time.
Yeah. You can absolutely say that, I would say. Certainly
Especially
the
that
best.
chorus line with that fucking pounding double bass.
Yeah. And that's when Blind Guardian is at its best, to be honest. It's when it's really going. It's when the drummer is doing thrash beats and Hansi's singing operatically, and then the guitars are, doing the power metal stuff.
And it's one of the most, like, especially like the guitar and keyboard duo there, where it's just like the most inspiring fucking riff you've ever heard. Like, you just want to go out and freaking slay dragons and shit after you listen to this. And yes, Fizz, throughout their entire career, Blind Guardian has been extremely influenced by Tolkien. I mean, on the first record, you have songs like "The Gates of Moria" and Gandalf's Rebirth.
Gandalf, yeah.
Like, these guys are super Tolkien influenced. Hansi Kirsch himself is a huge, huge John Tolkien nerd. I fully believe that he's read everything that they've ever put to pen. And when you look at some of the tracks on this record, even the album title itself, Nightfall and Middle Earth,
Mm-hmm.
like, it's all inspired by the Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's just Battle of Sudden Flame, another reference to the Silmarillion, the Eldar, bingo. It's just all over this. And, we really do need to do a show at some point on Tolkien's influence in the genre.
I wouldn't be the guy for that because I have a very, shallow, a very just kind of like surface level knowledge of Tolkien, the movies, and I read The Hobbit, and
Yeah, I'm talking to a couple of people for that show that this would be another huge stream, because, well, let's face it, Amon Amarth pretty much straight up takes their name from Lord of the Rings. Gorgoroth is another one straight out of Tolkien. There's a lot of black metal bands that take influence out of it, which is interesting.
I thought Amon, really?
The Amon Amarth is a location in Middle Earth.
Well, then, I thought it might have been some Viking warrior.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that their lyrical content isn't all that focused on Tolkien, but some of their lore is.
Mm-hmm.
And holy shit, we're talking about like Numenorian. Obviously, straight up takes that from Tolkien. I mean, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
Like, they are really, really. I mean, there's no bigger influence on power metal, especially, and heavy metal as a genre, I think, than John Tolkien. It's hardly the only big franchise like that, or a big IP like that has a big footprint in metal. I mean, the band Bolt Thrower, half of their lyrics are come straight from Warhammer 40K.
Why can't somebody do that for Star Wars? At least the George Lucas movies. That's what I've been waiting for.
It'd be interesting to see. Well, there is a band, heavy metal band, that does metal covers of the Star Wars.
Oh, yeah, I know those bands. Trust me, I know all of those bands that do the Star Wars themes. I've got all of them.
I love the one where all of the band members are dressed up as stormtroopers, except the singer, who's wearing a Darth Vader outfit. It's fucking awesome. And the Numenorians were men who are descended from a half elf. least their kings were. So they like that's where the Numenorians come in, men of the West, as it were. But no, like when you look at it, 40K should have a much bigger influence, and especially like the death metal scene. Because let's face it, it's perfectly tailored for that. Like power armored super soldiers battling the forces of hell, like on behalf of the God Emperor of mankind. Like, come on, that shit writes itself. But no, it's like power metal is really cool for that reason, because especially if you're into fantasy literature or sci-fi and stuff like that, you can see where all this stuff comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really brilliant way of just bringing it all together in a musical format and retelling the story in a different way.
Oh, I had a thought. Okay, so Tolkien is probably the one individual who has more influence on metal than any other person. But I would say horror and horror movies have a huge imprint on heavy metal too. Because I was just thinking about John Schaefer. I mean, I was thinking about, because John Schaefer, believe it or not, is a huge Star Wars nerd too, and he's come out with fantastic concept albums. One being Horror Show, which each song is based on a famous Universal horror monster.
Yeah,
and so if he can really tap into that, and when it comes to him, he's really good at making the listener emotionally connect with the subject.
Yeah,
he's just very, very good
when
at
it comes
that.
to history, Sabaton,
And they are the market for that.
Yeah, like they all of their stuff is based on military history. So obviously that pushed all my buttons the right way immediately as soon as I heard them. Because they weren't just discussing like the big events and stuff too. Like I think the first song I ever heard from them was "The Lost Battalion," which is actually a fairly unknown story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, these guys know about the Lost Battalion? All right, these guys really did their research and know what they're doing. And you have bands like Iced Earth who did the Gettysburg trilogy.
Oh my God, that is, the more I learn about the Civil War, the more I appreciate that trilogy of songs.
Absolutely, and it's really cool for me, especially where I just moved to. I'm right in the Shenandoah Valley.
And where is that? Where the majority of the Civil War battles happened?
Oh yeah, pretty much right up and down the Shenandoah Valley.
Wow. So are they still finding like artifacts from that?
What's that?
Oh, go ahead. I was just asking, are they still finding like Civil War artifacts?
Oh, yeah. Every now and again, somebody will find a belt buckle or something off in the woods.
That's amazing.
And there was a battle right near where I live in Winchester in 1864. That's actually where George Patton's granddad was killed.
Jeez. And this is what I'm talking about, emotionally connect with a subject that you have a very kind of like surface level understanding. The Gettysburg, I didn't know a lot. I only knew from school the history of the Civil War.
Well, so and that's the cool part about living in especially the East Coast is, I grew up 20 minutes from Lexington.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm actually distantly related to Captain John Parker.
Yeah.
Who was the leader of the Lexington militia. So, like, I have a very personal connection with that. And not only that, I can go and walk the battlefield. Like, it's literally 20 minutes from my house. So I can, like, I could just go and visit those places anytime I wanted. And, it's the same thing down here where you have, Fredericksburg's not too far away. Antietam's not very far away at all. Right. Gettysburg is like an hour and a half.
Well, what I was just referring to is similar to Sabaton. John Schaefer of Iced Earth was able to get me emotionally invested in a subject that I had only a very superficial understanding of, and really made me appreciate more of the historical events and circumstances that led up to it, and really made me view the Civil War not as the Confederates bad and the Union good, but more of just it being just a tragedy.
No, 100%. And, like you said, Texas with the Alamo and stuff like that. Like, there's all these places where, like, it's something special when you can literally stand where that happened and see it in your mind's eye in a lot of ways. Where, before it's just an event you read about in a history book somewhere. It's something completely different when you're standing there. like on the battlefields at Gettysburg, you know, on Little Round Top and whatever, and like you can see the battle happening in your mind's eye. It's a really different experience. But with that, I mean, this is Blind Guardian is a huge influence on this genre, possibly one of the biggest ones besides like Iced Earth and Halloween, in terms of power metal bands that then influence later ones. Whereas I don't think guys like Ingve or some of the earlier influences would consider themselves power metal, more speed and thrash.
Oh, Ingve wouldn't consider himself power metal, but he's about as power metal as it comes. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I
honestly,
mean absolutely. Dio wouldn't have called himself power metal either, but let's
yeah,
face it,
it's
without that
funny.
man, none of this shit would have happened. We were just
Exactly.
talking about that last week with Rainbow.
Right, exactly. It must be weird for the musicians to be categorized later in their career as having invented a genre when you were just making music just at
Yeah,
the
it's
same
like I,
time,
I
and then
just
for
wrote
them to kind of go
like, I
back
just
to
wrote an
look at it,
album. I
it's like,
never
oh
knew that
yeah,
was
I
going to
did
be
that.
the new thing.
Yeah.
So like that's got to be really interesting. But no, I mean I think that's going to do it for this one. I mean, yeah, Soul Assassin, Holy Diver is one of those songs that will never die. It's going to be played until the end of time, and there is a really, really good reason for a lot of it. And with that, I think we're going to call that here for today. Let you guys go enjoy the Super Bowl. I know I'm going to, even though I don't have a team in the fight. But Sentinel, what do you got going on this week, man?
I'm going to be very, very busy, so I don't have much going on as far as like channel content. But you'll see me on Twitter daily. You can follow me on Twitter at the Sentinel 831, and you'll see me on there just kind of every so often put something a random idea up or sharing a stream or referencing something that I'm going to be doing later on my channel. So you follow me there on Instagram on Twitter. You can follow me on Instagram at the Sentinel 41, or I mean the Sentinel 43. Jesus Christ, what the fuck? Yeah, the Sentinel 43. I'll add on Instagram, and of course my YouTube channel. You'll find me.
Absolutely, man, and absolutely go check out his video. His channel. He does a lot of really cool videos on a lot of Star Wars stuff, a lot of other interesting things that he just has an interest in. I watch a lot of his stuff, so I would heavily recommend it. At least when YouTube lets me know he puts something out. YouTube's horrible with that.
Yeah, YouTube doesn't like me.
Well, I'll get notifications for streams I'm on.
Oh man.
Like, and yet I won't get notifications that somebody I follow like puts a video out. I'm like, but like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, it's like,
and it's a bigger channel usually, right?
Gone live. It's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Thank you, YouTube, for letting me know my channel is live. Gee, I wonder who could have had something to do with that.
Yeah, I know, right?
But you know, outside of that, like obviously, you can catch me every week here for Rock and Roll Religion. You can catch me every Monday on 70s Rock Band's channel for It's Only Talk and Roll. We are covering grunge tomorrow, so if you want to hear me shit on some music, be sure to tune in for that because it's going to get bad. And then you can catch me every Tuesday for Vets Talking Tuesday over on Vets Talking, his channel. And then Saturdays for Skin and Max Saturdays on the same channel. And then coming up in the not too distant future, probably the last week of February, we're going to be doing another war movie review with a whole bunch of veterans and maybe some other guests as well. And we're going to be reviewing Full Metal Jacket.
Whoa,
So that should be
fucking,
a special movie.
You don't even have to. You don't even have to like be a war movie fan to like that movie.
Yeah, it's just a good movie in general.
It's just a good Kubrick. I can't say
Kubrick
enough.
was a genius.
He's a genius. He could do anything.
That's the only way you could say it. The man was just Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
He was a weirdo sometimes, but he was absolutely genius.
If anybody could have directed a great Watchmen film, it would have been Kubrick.
That would have been interesting to watch. And you know, I say that as somebody who actually enjoyed the Watchmen movie. But no, I mean, we got a lot of big things coming up for this channel. I'm going to start branching out onto Rumble a lot more with a lot more different kinds of content, maybe some military history stuff and maybe some political philosophy stuff that YouTube might not approve of, or just we might get into territory that YouTube might not approve of. So I want to have that ability to speak freely and have that conversation evolve naturally instead of like, having the sword of Damocles hanging over our heads.
Yeah.
And then if I can ever get it working correctly, I'll be probably doing some more gaming stuff. I tried to stream Hogwarts Legacy the other night. I couldn't end up doing it because my graphics card is just not up to the strain. And also, I don't think my internet connection liked it very much. So we will see where that goes. But with that being said, hopefully you guys will join me for all those things. Check out the Sentinel, check out Blind Guardian. I beg you, these guys are fucking awesome, and you won't regret a minute of it.
Especially if you're a Tolkien nerd. There's much must listen music if you are a Tolkien nerd.
Yeah, if you're a Tolkien nerd, you owe it to yourself to listen to these records.
Even if you don't like heavy metal, listen to those records.
And I think you'll definitely get an appreciation for it just by being a Tolkien nerd, knowing what the lyrics are about until then. But with that being said, take care, stay safe. I love you all, and I'll catch you next time.